This begins the 5th recorded lesson for the cell unit for students at Limestone Community High School in Mrs. Stout's biology class. In this lesson, we will talk about the organelles associated with energy. We will talk about the organelles associated with cell structure and support and locomotion, and we will talk about how cells work together. So first of all, we're talking about the energy transformers, and these are going to be usually the first thing that people think about are going to be the mitochondria, or if you have a whole bunch of them, mitochondrion. These are going to be the structures in your diagram that kind of looks like an oval with a big squiggly line on the inside. And that's really two membranes. It's an outer membrane and a highly folded inner membrane, and that inner membrane is called the cristae. It is on this highly folded inner membrane where the energy releasing processes take place. This is where your cell steadily releases energy from the food that you the food that you eat. So this would be an illustration. And again, let me try to change colors here. So this would be, not an illustration, but this would be a cell under a microscope. And looking at these lines back and forth here, those are going to be the cristae. This membrane here, oopsie daisies. This membrane surrounding the entire mitochondria, and then all of these lines going throughout the rest of this image with the dots on them, that is all endoplasmic reticulum, all rough endoplasmic reticulum. So this is actually just an illustration of the mitochondria. And just like with the endoplasmic reticulum, this membrane is really, really folded up so that you don't lose any area itself. You don't lose any surface area for work, but it doesn't take up actually as much room as if it was all spread out. The way that your cells release energy is by breaking the bonds from the food that you eat, and that releases the chemical energy within. Now, you don't need to know this process. It is called the Krebs cycle. You will learn that in anatomy and physiology with Coach Clausen, if that's something that you choose to take. But just what I do want you to take from it is that here at the top, you can see glucose, which is C6H12O6. That is one of the products of photosynthesis, and your body breaks that down to release energy. And you can see ATP. You have 2 here, you have 4 over to the side over here. ATP is the energy molecules that are released during cellular respiration. Plastids. Usually when people think of plastids, they're going to think of the most common one associated with green plants, and that is chloroplasts. And chloro is going to refer to green. Plastids are going to be other energy organelles. And they are going to be named according to the pigment that they contain. So chloroplasts have the pigment chlorophyll, which will be the color green. Chlorophyll is actually very, very efficient at capturing sunlight and turning it into usable chemical energy. It's the most efficient pigment. It's not the only one, though. It is so efficient because it uses direct sunlight. Other pigments use more indirect sunlight and weaker spectrums, of weaker parts of the color spectrum, so they can still process sunlight, but they just don't use the direct sunlight for it. So this is going to be things like red algae that are going to be deeper in the ocean, and even brown algae too. They trap the sun's energy, and remember, NRG is just my lazy way of writing energy. So if you don't want to use the abbreviation, don't. So they trap the sun's energy and convert it into usable chemical energy, which then gets stored as starches and sugars. So whenever you eat plants or whenever you eat any plant products, this is where you're getting your carbohydrates. Starches and sugars are the organic compound known as carbohydrates, which in a dieter's world is kind of a dirty word for carbs. But carbohydrates is where you get your energy, your quick energy of starches and sugars. This image is showing you a cell that is packed full of chloroplasts. each one of these is a chloroplast packed full of chlorophyll. So these green circle tower here, these are going to be packed full of your chlorophyll. So each one of these is a chloroplast. It is not a separate cell. In general, plastids will store energy as a starch or a lipid. Starch is going to be your fast energy made of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, and lipids are also made of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens, but lipids are going to be your fats, your longer-term energy storage. As I said, the plastids are going to be named according to the pigment that they contained. So chlorophyll is green. This one here is pronounced fucoxanthin, and that is brown. So your brown algae and your organisms deeper in the ocean are going to use some of those accessory pigments or those not green pigments. Again, this is the image of the chloroplast, and this is just showing you some additional plastids. Next, we're going to talk about the structures for support and locomotion. When I did the diagram lesson number 3, I talked about cytoskeleton and how cyto means cell, and skeleton is going to refer to a framework. So this is your framework for the cell. Your cytoskeleton is made of thin, hollow tubes and fibers that support the organelles, keep them in shape, keep them in place. And if you'll remember from the diagram, there's 2 different types that I want you to focus on. There's microtubules and microfilaments. They're both made of protein. They're both thin. One of the differences that I need you to know, though, is a microtubule is hollow. A microfilament is solid. And your cell needs both. Remember that they are made of the substance protein. Protein is going to be one of your organic compounds that is the building block for everything. It is the building block for all of your other parts. Next, we're going to talk about the structures for locomotion. We have cilia. Cilia are short, numerous hair-like projections of the plasma membrane. So notice that, projections of the plasma membrane. It's not actually a separate structure. It's just a part of the plasma membrane. If a cell will have cilia, there's usually lots of them, and they move in a synchronized wave-like motion. A flagella, usually a cell is going to have 1 or 2, and it kind of looks like a tail, but again, like the cilia, it's going to be a projection of the plasma membrane. It is not a separate structure. And as I mentioned with the flagella, in addition to only having 1 or 2, their motion that they're going to move with is going to be different than cilia. It's going to move in a whip-like motion for eukaryotic cells. In prokaryotic cells, it's going to spin like a propeller on a boat. And now we're going to look at how these cells work together. Now, some eukaryotic organisms are going to be just unicellular, and it's just going to be the one cell working on its own. A yeast is a type of unicellular eukaryotic organism. It's a type of fungus. All plants are multicellular, all animals are multicellular, but protists do have some unicellular eukaryotic organisms, things like Euglena, Paramecium, even some unicellular algae. But with regards to cellular organization, like I said, we have unicellular. Uni means 1, so made of 1 cell. This is showing you an example of a paramecium. So most of your bacteria, but remember bacteria are not eukaryotic. Bacteria are prokaryotic. Multicellular organisms, it's going to include most of your fungi, all of your plants, all of your animals, and some protists. These are going to be organisms composed of many cells, and that's because multi means many. This is an example of a fungus. We've got a plant here, and this is a dust mite. So it's still pretty small, but it is still multicellular. A tissue is a group of cells that do function together to perform an activity. So cells make up tissues. A group of 2 or more tissues working together makes up an organ. So this would be an example of a lung. And then when you have organs, a group of organs that work together to carry out a major life function like breathing, pumping blood, digesting food, regulating hormones, protecting the body, such as with your skin, that is called an organ system. So this would be an example of your respiratory system. Some of the organs involved here are going to be the lungs, the trachea, and then of course your larynx and pharynx and your nasal cavity. We have the circulatory system, which includes your heart, veins, arteries, and capillaries. We have the endocrine system, which is involved in your hormones, and you can see that there are part of the reproductive system involved there too. We have the digestive system. Some of your organs involved there include the liver, the gallbladder, the stomach, the large and small intestines, and then the nervous system, which includes your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord, and then your peripheral nerves branch out from both of those locations. And then an organism is any living thing that has all of their parts functioning together. They can respond to life and really satisfies the characteristics of an organism that we defined in the first unit. That concludes the recorded lessons for the cell unit for students in Miss Stout's biology class at Limestone Community High School. Your test is Tuesday, October 4th.